Three Dates and a Breakup Part 2 is the 20th episode of the 4th season of Frasier. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I don't think this needed to be a two-parter. I don't hate it necessarily, but I didn't really enjoy this episode very much. But we do have one scene that's really moving and very well done, and I will talk about that when we get there, but in general, the episode is okay. It starts off with Frasier and Niles being maybe a little bit too happy that Sherry and Martin broke up. This was at the end of the previous episode, of course, and Niles comes over and Frasier says, "I'd offer you a sherry, but I'm fresh out, and I can't remember when I last saw him looking so gleeful." We establish that it's the next evening because Frasier had 3 consecutive dates, and his second date, Adair, comes over, and Sherry also happens to come over around the same time to get her banjo, and she thought Adair was Kimberly from the other night and kind of put her foot in it. Adair, to be fair, wasn't too bothered that Frasier had had another date. People go on multiple dates when they're not in a committed relationship, but it turns out that it was the Kimberly who kind of also broke up Adair's marriage. So she's not exactly happy about that. The evening hasn't gone the way Frasier thought it would. We then cut to Cafe Nervosa. Roz comes in dressed very smartly to try and undo the damage that was done when she met somebody from her past in Cafe Nervosa when she was in from running and she had milk on her face. She looks nice. It was a nice enough way to include Roz because we don't go down to KSCL, so it worked well enough. Sherry then is in Cafe Nervosa, and she seems to pop up in a lot of different places in this episode. It's a little bit convenient that she seems to be in a lot of places at, I guess, the right time. And she has a talk with Frasier and Niles and asks if Martin had said anything, and she reveals that they'd actually both said, "I love you" for the first time a few nights ago. She had said it first. Martin did kind of hesitate, but he did say it. And Niles does point out that he had been previously reserved about that kind of thing. And even though Niles tries to discourage this, Frasier does say he will talk to Martin and see if he can find out what's wrong. And Frasier then goes home. We do have one scene that I found to be quite funny. When Frasier is in the elevator, he puts his umbrella up so the camera can't see him, and he ends up coming out with his trousers around his ankles. And Daphne is there, and I love the fact that Daphne wasn't fazed by it. Like, this is just a regular thing for Frasier to do something that she thinks is otherwise quite baffling, but she just kind of brushed it off and talked to the camera. Frasier then goes to talk to Martin, who is in the apartment. Sherry then arrives, and Frasier tells her to wait while he talks with Martin. Leslie then arrives for Frasier's 3rd consecutive date, and there's a lot of arguing in the kitchen with Frasier and Martin. Something smashes, and then we find out what's going on. And as I said, I don't think this needed to be a two-parter. I feel like we could have squished it into one episode. But at the same time, the scene where Martin basically explains that it felt uncomfortable to say "I love you" to somebody when it reminded him of course, his late wife. It was a very well executed scene, I think. I think it was very well done, and I think Frasier was able to offer the right kind of support in the moment. And I think the best takeaway from this is when Martin said she'd be better off with some guy who isn't going through all this stuff, and Frasier said, "Shouldn't you let her decide?" And I love that, because quite often people will sabotage relationships because they don't think they're good enough for that person, or they don't think that's what that person really wants, but it shouldn't be up to them to decide. If they care about that person, let that person decide. And this is what Frasier encourages, and I thought it worked really well. And then they spend time together. Leslie and Frasier are about to go out, and then they all leave the apartment together, and it was fine. It worked well enough as an ending. Well, we have a brief ending with Frasier and Niles, but the main ending was absolutely fine. The episode isn't bad, I just didn't think it was that interesting. As I said, for me, the only funny moment, actually, in my opinion, is when Frasier was in the elevator with his umbrella up, which seems like really bad luck now I think about it. But other than that, it is fine. I think for me, the only 2 good bits were the elevator and then with Martin and Frasier in the kitchen. I otherwise don't think it needed to be a two-parter, and I don't like Sherry. I just do not like Sherry, and we haven't seen the last of her. So we'll talk more about Sherry, I guess, in due course. I don't hate the episode, but to be honest, I don't know if I'd skip it. If I was binge watching season 4, it depends on how lazy I was, if I could be bothered to skip it or not, or if it's just easier to just watch it. It's watchable. It's not a bad episode as such. I just don't get a lot of joy out of this one. 3 Dates and a Breakup Part 2 has some good moments, but in general, I don't exactly love it.